So this is Annette from Coney, who I first saw a few years ago before I'd met anyone involved with it, doing A Small Town Anywhere at Battersea Arts Centre, in which there were no actors as part of the main performance. There was someone who kind of introduced it, but the audience were all the actors themselves. So each had different roles within it. I was the butcher. I had, I think, 2 tins of spam and a meat cleaver. Those were my props. And they did, and it could be something that's quite daunting, but they had a very clever way of leading you through it in a way that there were possibilities for different outcomes, but also it was structured in a way that made you feel comfortable, and also I guess you probably had some idea of which way it was going on different nights. So it was somewhere between game design and theatre. It was a really fascinating experience, and it never kind of really occurred to me about what work might go into actually developing something like that, which is incredibly complicated and has lots of different factors, and actually you're taking it to the next level with a new production, so I imagine that's gotten even more complicated. So I'm looking forward to hear how you do that. What is your process? How is failure involved?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Annette. That was a wonderful explanation, and makes about 3 slides completely unnecessary. No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So what I really liked when Martha invited me to come and talk here is, I can't remember how you exactly put it, but it was something along the lines of, well, you fail so much in your work, so it'd be really interesting to hear you talk about it, which, you know, is hard to resist, really. So I'm here to talk to you about how much I fail and how I fail a lot. So as Martha said, I am one of 3 directors of Coney, and Coney makes interactive experiences, sometimes on the streets, sometimes in schools, sometimes in theatre, sometimes in cultural institutions, sometimes fully online. But what really typifies our work is that the audience is the leading character. They are the heroes in the story. So we're creating experiences for them. So it looks very differently. Sometimes it never looks like this. That's really important. So when I say the word theatre, no matter how often I say that the audience is the leading character, still people sort of try and imagine something like this. No people sit down in rows looking at us ever, unless I talk about failing, apparently. So it looks like this, sometimes like this. This is A Small Town Anywhere, where we had a wedding. It always snowed on a night, but that night it was used for a wedding as well. So these are all audience members you're looking at. No one's an actor. It can look like this. I'll talk a little bit more about this. This is a stage of a show that looks very great. Everyone's really engaged. I don't know if you can see. It's quite a dark slide. It was really exciting, and we threw out everything we did in that production. It's turned into this, quite a different aesthetic. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And sometimes it looks like this. So we also do work in schools called Adventures in Learning. I can talk a little bit about what went on, what you talked about just now, because we started developing with teachers. So the very first time we did, this is a project which we've only just developed, which is about basically Olympic gods. This is Zeus over here wearing a suit, and they're bringing back the pantheon. So we use stories to deliver curriculum, and we work with teachers to develop the narratives and the format in which curriculum gets delivered. What we have found is that if it's packaged as a story, so for example, A Cat Escapes is a story that takes place in 6 episodes and delivers key stage learning in sessions each week, which we've developed quite closely with teachers. And we're doing new stuff now. Now the curriculum is changing. So we mostly work with primary school teachers, primary school ages, and deliver curriculum learning through stories. So really, I can talk more about that, but I'm going to talk about failing, which we've done with this as well, but it works differently with kids. So fail forward. It's one of those cliches. We've all heard it. There's lots of it going on. We sort of do that. I'm not going to make a case that failing is a really good thing to do. Failing is a really good thing to do so that you can learn what it is that you're actually doing. For us, it came really natural. We sort of realized really early on that if you make interactive work, if you put the audience in the center of whatever you're making, if you're creating an experience that responds to audiences, you better practice that with audiences and figure out what it is that you're making and what kind of things that you make up at your desk or under the shower or wherever in the park that actually works, that audiences are responding to what you are doing, and that thing that you're making with them is what you're actually doing. So lots of cliches: fail forward, Thomas Edison, yep, Michael Jordan, I always like Michael Jordan. So all of that I'm just going to take as a given. I'm just going to talk about how I fail as well as possible, etc. So failing well is a skill I've sort of learned. I've been working in this way and making this kind of work for God knows how long now. Not quite a decade, but it's getting there. And if you sort of take failing as part of a process of development, so iterative development, you do something, you test it, you come back to it, you then do something else and something new. It's quite a well-known way of doing it. So I'm just going to talk about the things that I think about when I'm going through an iterative process to make the failing as forward as possible and not just sort of a sequence of failures without an end result. So it is, I do think it's a skill. I'd never realized that, but actually being asked to write down how I would advise people to fail made me realize that there is something to it. So I want to say this because I think that's often misunderstood. I think failing is really scary, and it remains scary, and I've been doing it again for almost a decade now, and it still makes me feel really ill when I put something in front of an audience that I know will break. Which is what I do. I put things in front of audiences as an experiment. I do it as well as possible, but I also know that I'm not ready yet. It is not ready yet, so it will fail, and it makes me sometimes quite physically ill. So that doesn't ever get any better, so that's good. So I was going to talk about Early Days of a Better Nation, which is a show that I'm currently making and still in the middle of failing, but quite far into failing now. So Early Days of a Better Nation is a show not unlike A Small Town Anywhere that Martha talked about, in which the audience takes a leading part. Imagine a country in ruins. The war is over. The fog of war is still out there. A World Council contacts a small group of representatives to start negotiations about how this nation can be rebuilt and whether or not the World Council, read UN-ish, can support and will support this country. Is this a viable country? So basically, in a sort of 2-hour show, the audience creates a new country every night. For us, it's really exciting to do because the audience takes such a leading part. We create a new country each night, which is very exciting. So when we started it, the very first iteration was in the equivalent of a pub, really, with 30 people. We'd invited mostly other makers, people we know, people we thought, intelligent players, so to say, and we put something in front of them. They created a nation that night. Wasn't very good. And the main problem with it was that in the first iteration, everyone was really nice. I call it the Kumbaya version. Everyone sort of, not quite, but could as well have held hands and sang that we were all going to get along in the future at the end of it, which is really nice. And we all had beers in the end, but it was, it's not a show. It didn't do anything, not anything exciting. The second time we did it, so we did some work. We went to Wales and looked at the assembly. It was very nice. And then we played it in Wales and in London because we also realised that we wanted to play it in different environments. And if we only tested in London, we'd just always have the same people and the same kinds of people. So we did it in Wales and in London, which is really exciting. Because in both versions, again, I knew that they were broken, but in both versions, sort of the audience completely rebelled and they became incredibly sort of tense. And I remembered, especially the London one. I don't know if you've ever been on a demonstration, and it can get to the point where it's quite electric. The air is sort of electric, and violence might occur. It sort of felt a little bit like that, which, again, physically made me ill. I had no idea how to get to the end of that evening. However, as soon as sort of it went to black, we don't really have curtains, but the equivalent of the curtain came down, people erupted in the bar and kept talking and kept talking and kept talking. And as my nausea sort of went down a little bit, I started realizing that actually that was really, really exciting, and we really wanted to do something with that and keep that. So again, that whole electricity started because we had a sort of an element of a replica, in essence, of the UK system, where the lead party, so the biggest party, would provide the prime minister and basically, or the equivalent, I think it was called president or leader or something along those lines. And although we communicate that in the beginning, people sort of forgot about that. So by the time they hit the end, they just felt like, well, we might be small, we the Green Party, but we still want to have a shot at leadership, and they couldn't. That was really exciting. So that tension and that drama that came out of voicelessness, which is very much intertwined with the show, is really exciting. So we kept that. Then we did another one, which had that really lovely photo of people looking very tense in green light. I don't know if you remember that from earlier. And we decided that we would build on this tension and really, really set up sort of haves and have-nots within that. And it was a really interesting show. It also didn't work. Again, we knew it wouldn't. But in this case, we threw out the entire show that we made. We kept nothing of it. Maybe like a couple of names and a cute image. Because we sort of realized that we were starting to make a show about money now. And that's not what it's about. So I think what's really important is to sort of keep in mind what the nucleus of your show is. What is it about? Because it's really quite easy, actually, to get enchanted and disrupted by your own process. Because that particular failure, it was at the In-Between Time Festival, I think it's all right to say. It was exciting, and there is a show there. It's just a different show. I could go back one day and maybe make a show about haves and have-nots, but it took away from politics and exploring what a new nation would look like. You know, the nucleus for this show is very much the pub question. Like, what if you ruled the world tomorrow? What would you change? It's what if we could start again? What would we do? What's at the heart of a nation? All of these things. And that experiment took us away. So keeping in mind what the nucleus is really important. Secondly, you'll get lots of feedback when you do this. Audiences are amazing at being audiences and therefore know everything about what it is to be an audience in your thing. So they are the expert on what it is that you're making. What's really weird, and again, slightly sick-inducing, is that they know more about the experience that you're making than you do. I've never been in my own show because I can't be. It's really weird. Even if I am in my own show, I know what's happening next, so I'm not an audience anymore. So this is great. Also, they have no idea what they're talking about half of the time. So it's dealing with feedback is really interesting in this. You really have to listen, but then also ignore some of it. So in one of the shows that we did, one of the development shows for early days, we stopped it after sort of Act 2. And we asked the audience, what would you like to happen next? And what we got, like, almost consistently, is that in the narrative at that point, they're gone now, there was this sort of... there was unrest out there. There were violent mobs around, and they were encroaching on the building. Everyone, like literally every single audience member went, can they come in with guns and really ask us what we really would do now? So obviously, A, 1,000 million pounds in extras with guns that we didn't have, but B, also... So we tried to, we also thought, actually, this show is sort of, it's not the tension that we want. The tension is not about violence or not violence. There needs to be something, the stakes need to shift. So what we realized is that we wanted different stakes to matter as much as the guys with guns by the time we hit that point. So again, absolute expert in their own experience, but they didn't know what they wanted to make this a good show. You know, men with guns would be fine, but also that moment would last about this long, and then men with guns at you in a theatre are completely irrelevant because you go, it's an actor with a gun. Like, the stakes are actually quite low. But so what we look at instead is which behaviours we've seen in audiences and which experiences we've seen that they talk about. The bar, by the way, is of vital importance. Like, you can do a lot of this with forms and formal Q&As, but I always stay in the bar and talk to lots of different people, which is where you get the best feedback. Anyway, so we figure out which behaviours we want to support. So what have we seen that we want more of, or have more people have that kind of behaviour or experience, and which do we want to disrupt? I think it's really important for us when you're building experiences to disrupt where they normally go. That's sort of the point. So their expertise, again, is in their experience, and ours is then in unpacking what that means and how we create what we create. So sort of this whole thing is basically always about balancing between staying on your course, staying the course with your nucleus, knowing what it is that you're making, why you're making it and what it's about, but then also being surprised and being willing to be surprised by your audience and really taking on board what they're bringing. So it's balancing those two, really. I think if you're not surprised, you might as well not do this whole iterative development and failing malarkey. But if you don't stay on course, you sort of really run the risk of just iterating till the end of the universe, because there will always be something new and something interesting to respond to. So this is something I stole from a game designer. I thought, you know, we're doing games. This is really how to make a successful game. So you have, like, what is it that you want to do? What's the goal? The player makes an action through the rule system. They success or fail. The game then gives them feedback and sets them a new goal. And then the challenge is giving the action towards positive feedback. I thought this was quite a nice model about how we think about actually failing ourselves. So success is really lovely in this thing. Like, success doesn't really exist. So it's just sort of failing over and over again, but really doing it quite systematically, so that you build towards something, so you level up, so to say, like in games. So one of the many mistakes I've made in the past, and I've seen so much, is obviously with this thing, it makes absolute sense to start small. You should start small. I started with my 30 people in the pub, which were friends, like nice low levels. You have to, if that's what you're aiming for, so if you want to go big, keep that in mind, because I've also seen people iterate beautifully until it worked beautifully for like 5 people, the amount of people they kept testing with. But what works for 5 people doesn't work for 5,000 people, and vice versa. Things that work for 5,000 people can be quite dull for 5 people. So you have to keep thinking towards the big end goal, and make sure that even though you do small iterations of it, which saves money and time and you get better feedback and all of that, that you are working towards the scale that you're working towards, and keeping that in mind during all the iterations. Again, because otherwise you just iterate for the sake of iteration. This is probably one of the most important things, is framing. Coney has this really loyal following of people that come to test with us. They love this, and we frame what we do really well. So when we're testing, we sort of yell off the roofs that we are testing, and we invite people to be part of a process of testing. That means that the ticket prices are super low. It means that often at the beginning and or the end, often both, I stand on a chair or a stage, depending where we are, and sort of explain where we are in the process and why we're doing this and why this is interesting. We share our research results, if there is any sort of specific research result, with anyone who wants it. We frame our process very much as part of our work, and that means that the audience knows where they're at. They know that they are happy for it to fail. They help me if it sort of is breaking. They help me get over that little obstacle that obviously ain't working quite yet, and play on, because they know what they're in. If I didn't do that very specific framing, which I have done in the past, that bit gets lost, and people get a bit grumpy, or they don't really know what they're doing, or they're not engaged with the process they're actually part of. So for me, taking your audience with you on that journey of development is really important, and it leads to fans and advocates. So by the time that you hit market, which as theatre makers is a really weird word to use, but for us, when it's finished, when it goes somewhere, we already have fans, we already have people going, telling their friends, there's already network around it, because so many people have seen this show. Early days will be played during Parliament Week. We're working with first-time voters, ex-offenders, political professionals, and actually quite a small amount of tickets are available to the general public. Because we're really interested in a mixed audience for this and figuring that out as part of UK Parliament Week, basically. And we already know that those tickets will be gone really quickly. It's almost that we are now figuring out how to invite the people who've been part of the process, because it's out there and people have a bond with it. Like, there are people who've seen it in that pub, and every iteration since. It has had 5 now, including one in the Netherlands. So fans and advocates, when you go to market, they're with you already, and they're ready to buy, they're ready to spend their money, and they're ready to tell their friends that they should come as well, or buy it as well, or do it, which I think is great. Massive question. So for us, at some point you just do. Like, it's never going to feel completely finished, and it will always be better if you put more time and effort and energy, and if there's another development cycle. So answer this question almost at the beginning, and be willing to let the answer fail, because sometimes you just do need more time. But I think there's a lot of companies that just forever iterate, and that's the other death trap. Is it will never, it will never be done. It will never be perfect. So set your end. This is what I'm currently going to fail insanely at. So I just thought I would share it with you. We're doing a live interactive show for a live audience in the space and a live audience online. Both audiences are equally important and can interact with the story, change the narrative, are part of it. The characters play to both. They can communicate with characters both from either side. I have no idea what that really means. It feels really exciting, and it feels like quite a breakthrough for us to expand audiences, to have a whole new way of letting audience engage with it, to connect geographically dispersed people, to give audiences access to spaces that they normally can't get to. Lots of stuff. I'm making this right now. So just to go back, so what I want to say about this is, for me, what's been really exciting about this process, I have no idea what I'm doing. Obviously, I know a little bit. I know about how audiences know about development. But what we find really useful with this is working with Showcaster, who know everything about online broadcasting, because that's what they do. Very commercial, do the online broadcasting for The Sun and Made in Chelsea, and excellent work like that. Football, really important, big, robust. So they know something about infrastructure that if I had to learn that to do this, it would be absolutely impossible. Goldsmiths University are doing research for us on it so that we can really, really go in depth with. We're going to measure types of agency that are meaningful to audiences. So we put a whole filter in place that measures what people do, what they're willing to do, if they have to make a choice between A and B, what's more important, what generates most meaning for people. So we have some really genuine research about how these audiences relate to each other and what kind of thing they want to do apart and together when it disrupts and when it actually becomes really strong. And the lovely people of Nesta who have been part of the entire process and also of financing. So I think finding interesting people to fail with, so you don't have to invent the wheel. If you know that you're entering new territory, find the people that are willing to do this with you, fail with you really well, but also bring something to it that you could never do on your own. So come and see it. You can see it online. I would highly recommend, if you only see one, come to this one, because this one's going to be rubbish. We have no... This is really where we, for the first time, put it together. But again, we sort of decided that we wanted to do open rehearsals at the end of the first week and a couple of days, really, and sort of show it. Because if we've got audience members that by here need to understand maybe what's going on, if we need to understand ourselves maybe what we've done wrong or what the next iteration would look like, it makes sense to invite people halfway through, well, not at the end of the first week and a half, then a week later, and then so that when we present it maybe to people who just want to have a peek, hopefully by this time it makes sense. It will still fail, but we'll understand how we're failing. Here, we'll just fail. Do come. So again, failing still makes me absolutely ill, like that. Just showing that and sort of going, oh God, some of you will come. It literally still makes me feel really ill. I'm going into rehearsal as of next Tuesday. So again, it doesn't get any better, but it's really, really, for me, the only way to work, really the only way to innovate, to make actual stuff that is actually new and doesn't break, but also really does something to and with audiences and sort of works in a new way. So there you go. This is me, so you can contact me with any questions. Thank you. Or you do questions now. I have no idea how long that was. That
was perfect. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Annette?
Thanks for that. That was incredibly interesting and just seems like a fabulous kind of metaphor, really, for learning and how people can grow and learn through experimentation and discovery. And I guess I'm interested in how you use this with children and how it might look different in a sort of an educational context.
So I think to really think about that with children and any group really is to test in the appropriate stage with the appropriate people. So back to early days, we are now going to work with first-time voters and ex-offenders. That's not what we did in the pub. In the pub, we did something very safe. So when we're working with young people, depending on what age group, we do paper play tests. So we sort of make models of things and invent the game together. When we work in schools, we always start with teachers. We basically just do talking workshops, maybe with some active elements in it. Then we make something, then we bring that back to them. So before it ever sees its first child, even though the child also knows they're part of making something, it's already quite developed on. We would never sort of go as blank as I was talking with early days, just in the pub, just throw something and see what sticks. So with children, you sort of build towards it. And again, I think they're really excited when they are part of making something. My colleague Tom made an entire board game based on a school with with all the different year groups. They were moving house, which was as big as their schoolyard, and they co-designed that game together, which they started from scratch. And it was brilliant. I think young people are really, they find this process really easy, iterating and sort of failing and playing and then trying something. One of the games that we sometimes do in workshops, we play with grandmother's footsteps, which everyone knows. We do grandmother's footsteps, and then we sort of ask, we do this with grown-ups as well as with young people, like, which rules shall we change? And, you know, the first one's always, let's do it all on one leg, or let's all close our eyes. It's always something very simple. And then we do that. And then we go, did that work? Was that good? Was that bad? Okay, let's try another one. And then we try them both together. And then we decide whether we want to keep them. Do we want to do another one? And also figure out that too many rules and too many layers just becomes really dull because it's too complex. So I think there's grown-ups and children, I think, really enjoy the process of making and being part of something that fails as much as seeing the end result. Again, it sort of comes back to framing and knowing what you're making within that moment, like that game of grandmother's footsteps, and figuring out the best possible ever game of grandmother's footsteps needs to be fun in its own right, as well as delivering the education. So all of that remains present. Does that make sense?
Hi there. In your talk, you seem to describe failure in the way I would describe it as not being very good. So you do something, it's not very good, you iterate, and you do something more. Do you think there's a role or a place that you found for profound failure, i.e. the failure that leads to no further action, that closes doors? And is this productive?
Yeah, I think I would describe my particular brand of failure as necessary. So I know that when I put something in front of an audience, I work really hard so that it won't fail, but it will. I also know that it will, and I'm comfortable with that. I think that's part of my sort of decade of training. Much harder in the beginning than I find it now. So I think it's being comfortable with knowing that elements will inform your future steps, and other elements, many elements will inform your future steps, and some of the elements will therefore stay with you because they've proven themselves, and other elements will be thrown out because they have disproved themselves. It seldomly happens, because we do work very hard on these iterations, that profound failure happens. But I would describe the show at the In Between Time Festival as an absolute failure. We literally took virtually nothing forward for it. It was incredibly educational because we just saw that by bringing, it was all based on haves and has not. It sort of almost had like a mini economical system in it. That was basically, the rule was, as soon as you bring in money, it's all about the money. And everything else just went. So as a development stage, that was a really expensive failure for us because we can only fail so many times, and we had this pot of money to do something with and this brilliant festival to present it. And we basically created something that wasn't amazing because it was still broken, but also wasn't that useful other than into the, and this is a door we're closing now. So I think profound failure is there. What we do try and do is make our profound failures for us as entertaining for the audience that are there as possible. So we really do work really hard so it's not a lost evening for them or a lost afternoon or whenever it takes place. So I think, does that answer your question? Not really.
I need to think about it.
Okay, well, ask me more about profound failure. I'm really interested in it.
Any other questions? I've got one. Like you go through like a long process, and then within the performances themselves, I guess they have quite a long run. But have you ever gotten to a point in the kind of the polished performance where something's gone really wrong, or do you find that this process kind of evens all of that out and gets rid of that likelihood? And if it has ever gone wrong, like how do you deal with that at that point?
It's never, when it's finished, it's never profoundly gone wrong. because I think by that time, because we work towards something being incredibly responsive, we already have sort of hammered down so many different possibilities of audience choice and audience path and audience behaviour and we've tested that, so we know our peaks and troughs. I think we've had weird nights. So I remember, A Small Town Anywhere was quite an early show of ours, which I think was brilliant, but it was also an early show for us, so it wasn't perfect in any way, shape or form. We had this weird night when we had LARPers in. LARPers are live action role-playing people who are a fabulous subculture who basically reenact or play narratives out over an entire weekend, and they dress up and they go to faraway places. It's quite amazing. I've never been, but I should really. We had a few LARPers in with a more non-LARPy audience, a more regular audience, and they came in so what we call hot. They sort of came in and were like solving it and doing it in a way, and we in our craft, so to say, we work really hard at sort of gently easing people into adventures, easing people in the world, taking them, sort of capitulating people into the narrative, into activity, into interaction, all of that malarkey. We work really hard on. And that was sort of pushed to the side by a couple of people who are just so au fait with a different genre that has some of the same etiquette or forms that we didn't really know how to save our audience from that part of the audience. So it became a really weird, disjointed evening. But it was also brilliant in a way because they really ran with it, and then they were pulled back by their own fellow small towners at some point, and then they ran off and into the woods. There were woods next to the small town, which was brilliant, and I had a brilliant time, and it didn't seem to, but for us that was a real, I don't know if tonight's going to work night. So we do have that, but it becomes weird rather than we have to stop it because we're so far ahead by then.
Okay, which I guess is a testament to the process, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it is. Cool. One more question?
Hi. So, how can you tell that something failed? I mean, do you measure? Do you ask the participants for some feedback afterwards? Or, I mean, what does fail exactly mean for you?
So, first of all, I think failing is quite objective. It's quite subjective. So when I go into a test situation, I know what I'm looking for. So I'm already going, we build that thing in there to see if they'll go with it or not. So I already have questions in my head. So I'm literally just watching out for, this is the point. They're not. That's interesting. So I have that. So I've got a series of almost laboratory questions where you observe the test subject and see if they do the thing that you've set up as an experiment. Secondly, you can just do quite formal evaluation, so forms, tick boxes, the whole shebang. We often do just a bit of quite playful, qualitative. So, like with early days, for example, we did every feedback session after a certain one. We asked people to stand in a line between the different characters and where they think their leader would come from. There's 4 actors in there, which are all based on different political viewpoints. And they were standing in a line to see whether or not this country would be most likely to, if this country would exist in a week, if it would exist in a year, so we did sort of quite playful and people sort of ran around. It was quite fun. And then the third thing is we do qualitative actual interviews with just a couple of selected people, try and get a cross-representation of the people that you want to talk to. And finally, very important is tea and cake / the bar. We try and provide at the end of anything snacks and or drinks, depending on age group and time of day, because actually I think for me that's often the most productive space. I think one thing to look out for with this is that audiences can be very polite or just weirdly specific in their initial feedback. So they'll give you a whole treatise about one particular thing, and actually that's not really important either to you, or it's just that day. And getting past that in the bar or over tea and cake can be really, really helpful.
Thank you very much, Annette. Cool. Cool. We're just going to take 5 minutes to set up for our next speaker, so feel free to say hello to your neighbour, have a quick bathroom break. The loos are just round there. Thanks.